3D printing and air. Each of those are probably 5 minutes to 10 minutes each, so 50 minutes, you know, that's what a professor usually likes to talk about. However, I can't take that long because the ride I came up with is following me, and if I cut too much into Pat's time, I might be walking home. So we're going to talk about those topics. Why alternate protein? All of you are consumers. Price is the primary denominator of how we select food, and then guess what the second one is? Dr. Morrison, what's the second one? Oh, does it taste good? Does it taste good? I want to eat it again. And so when we look at push drivers, we're looking at health. Most of us are worried about our health, particularly after being at home all these months. Animal welfare is a huge consumer concern, and sustainability. Those are pushing towards alternate proteins that are not from animal-derived products. And then the pull drivers, curiosity, convenience, personal nutrition, and by the time you throw in investors who see a new opportunity for products, that's why the demand. Now, I'll just reassure you right now, you're Forage and Grassland people. We have ruminant animals. As long as we have forages and pastures, we're going to have ruminants. Those ruminants are going to be used for meat, eggs, and dairy products. Okay? So don't say, I'm going to be out of a job. As long as we have pastures and we have land that is not really suitable for raising crops or putting on asphalt, we're going to have meat products. Because some of the traditional people look at it this way. Even the ethnics whose second and third generations who have come to America become Americanized, they still want some of those ethnic foods. And so in that regard, even though I'm a meat scientist, I have an appreciation for the topic I'm going to talk about because it involves science, and I'm a scientist first. When we talk about the purchase drivers, again, taste, clean label is a big deal. We don't have enough time to talk about what a clean label is. When you see a name on a label that you can't pronounce or you don't know is common, that's what we call a non-clean label. So, again, when we talk about meat products, what's the ingredient? Well, it's meat. And so in that regard, there are lots of consumers now who are not looking for the alternative products, as you'll see in a couple of minutes. Texture, protein content, structure, fat level, protein level, probably all of those are things that you or some of your family members or friends have either asked about or you've been concerned about. This is a reassurance to me when we actually look at the consumption. Other than I never eat this kind of protein, all the other categories, eating less, eating more, eating the same amount, are about the same. Now this is a busy slide. Don't want to hit the wrong button here. But if we look across meat, other products, protein from plant sources and plant alternatives to meat, you can see that it's not really changed much in the last year. And that tells me that maybe the market is starting to stabilize just a little bit on these alternate protein products. We're going to talk first about meat from cultured cells. There's all kinds of names. Fake meat, lab-grown meat, tested meat, artificial meat. You've seen them all. USDA and FDA, as I'll talk about in a few minutes, have not decided on what are appropriate names yet. They're produced from cells and not animals. But guess where those cells come from? They have to be derived from animals. Either embryonic stage, or they have to be harvested in a slaughter plant. And if you don't have a slaughter plant, you're not going to be able to harvest those cells. It's really easy, won't go back. It's really easy to make cells. Our cell culture technologies no problem. So for ground, or what we call common unit products, yeah, you just grow cells, kind of mash them together a little bit, and you've got a product that does resemble ground beef or ground chicken or ground pork or even ground fish products. The hard part is intact products, because our animal bodies, your muscle tissues, are not just protein. There's also fat, there's also nerve cells, there's connective tissue. There's all kinds of other aspects of trying to make an intact product. We're not at that stage yet. I keep flipping slides. FDA and USDA, this is a point of controversy for them. In their infinite wisdom, and I don't use that sarcastically as I normally would, but some of you deal with FDA because they have to do with what we put on our different crops and forages, what we put in our animal feeds. FDA is going to have jurisdiction of the cell growth. Then, when it comes to actual harvesting of those cells, FDA and USDA will share responsibility. And when it comes then to the actual producing those cells into a product, then the USDA, FSIS, Food Safety and Inspection System, will have jurisdiction so that the labeling, safety, and everything else of those products meets the same standard as for our inspected meat products. Now, when it comes to using those cells for animal feed, it's going to divert right back to FDA because FDA controls animal feeds. So that's why they haven't reached an agreement yet as far as what the name is going to be so that consumers aren't confused. My guess is that there's going to be a variety of names that USDA is going to say is acceptable because they do that with meat products now. When we talk about cultured cell meat approaches, if we look all the way back to the basic proteins, actinomycin, troponin, tropomyosin, and all the other 50 that we've identified, then essentially they are assembled along with the other cell components into fibers, and eventually we make a tissue, and we all know about muscles. Particularly when you get to a certain age and those muscles ache when you do stuff you ought not to be doing, you know that, yeah, it's just not the proteins that I need to replenish. So because of that, every, quote, cell-based company has a different approach. So we're going to have different products based upon those cell approaches. Cultured cell meat concept is really simple. You have a cell line or a tissue line, you cultivate it into some kind of a bioreactor, and the brewery industry started, and now, based upon our pharmaceutical companies, they have lots of bioreactors. That's not a problem. We can grow those cells. The difficulty is in tissue structuring. How do you actually get those cells to mesh together? And so some of the research that our Zingfu muscle biologist at LSU is doing, some of the things working with different breeds of cattle and how adipose tissue and connective tissue and muscle tissues grow and develop in the embryo through the fetal stage and then on into a live animal. Some of that basic biological knowledge is needed so that we can actually fuse those cells together in a cell culture media. So the cell culture process is very highly dependent not only on the past research we've done with animal cells, but on the future research that hopefully will develop in the next few years. So again, animal science is not going away simply because of the need for that inter-exchange of science. Most of you are aware that a lot of the medical breakthroughs that for humans have been done with animals first. Then when we talk about cultivation, I'll get into that in a little more detail, but the actual cultivation is, again, one of the complex problems. The difficulty right now is, what do you feed those cells? Those cells grow and develop, they have to have something as nutrient sources. Right now, the biggest draw is to use fetal animal serum because they have all the growth components that are really needed then for these in vitro cells to grow and develop. I've already talked about the scaffolding that is difficult, bioreactor design and cost considerations. Right now, the cost has come down from 5 years ago at $10,000 a pound to now about $2,000 a pound. So as long as they keep scaling down, eventually they might be cost competitive. There are all kinds of companies. You can see the product on the top is that ground product. That is an actual cell-based product. It's not ground beef. And then on the bottom, that's what it looks like. I like this quote from Aleph Farms, CEO. Meat is not just proteins. Meat is an experience. And so that's the other factor that all the cultured cell companies have to overcome is our perception is our reality. And if you believe that cells are going to save the world and are the most sustainable source of animal protein, and that's your perception, then that is going to become your reality, and those are the products that you're going to try to seek. So in intact cultured meat, the goal is to have the meaty flavor and sensorial attributes, the taste and flavor that we associate with different meat products. And so as a result, we have to have some kind of 3D scaffolds that mimics animal muscle tissue development. So there's all different kinds of, quote, bio compounds, because you obviously don't want to put a toxic or a non-degradable product into an edible product. For one, it's not allowed by our regulations. But second, those of you who eat high fiber foods know that sometimes you just don't have those good taste experiences. Cell growth factors and co-cultures of different cells are also the difficulties at this point in time. So we're making progress. You see every day, almost in the news, something about cells, cell cultures, whether it's with meat, analogs or other products, but right now we're just not there. This is an extremely busy slide. The cell biologist can explain this a whole lot better than I can. All I know is that at some point in time, an embryonic cell decides, I'm going to become a muscle cell, I'm going to become a fat cell, I'm going to become a nerve cell, and all of those factors work together that we have to develop an intact animal. That's for those cell biologists and not a meat scientist. An interesting development is that there are some unique possibilities. McMaster University scientists, they grow sheets of cells on thin plates and thin layers, and then they put them together at the right stage, and all of a sudden those different layers will fuse together. And so they believe, and they've got a patent pending on the process both in Canada and the US, that this might be one of these solutions to how do we get a more intact fiber type structure with our co-cultured cells. Let's switch into plant-based analogs. Guys, you've all seen the advertisements. The Whopper that's not a Whopper. And so if you haven't tasted one, I advise you to taste one. You will have your own opinion. And the opinions range from, yeah, I'll never go back to meat again, to, whoa, maybe I'll never eat any kind of product that resembles meat ever again. And so I urge you just to try it, even though the price point is a little bit higher than for a regular meat product. They are technically products that use different plant sources. And so in order to mimic the texture, fiber, characteristics, and the taste of meat, you have to use all kinds of different compounds. Whether it's pulse flours and proteins, peas, chickpea, fava, mung beans, different proteins, both. And by the way, even though it's not vegan, the vegetarians consider that egg white proteins are perfectly acceptable in their products if they're, quote, primarily plant-based. Vegetables, mycoproteins, oilseeds, grains, seaweed, algae, lentils, and down here that you can't see, maltodextrins and spike starches, all different kinds of ingredients are being used by the different companies. The two most probably well recognized are the Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat burger. And you can find those even at Walmart now in their refrigerated and frozen section. I told you about clean labels earlier. These are the two major disadvantages. One is a huge list of ingredients. The second is that virtually every plant-based protein, alternate protein as we call them, has a difficulty. With Impossible Foods, it's leg hemoglobin, which is a GMO, genetically modified form of hemoglobin and myoglobin that we find in the body. And so the fact that it's produced by a bioreactor as a GMO product, all of a sudden those consumers who are knowledgeable say, well, okay, I can get beyond things because I know what riboflavin is, I know what textured wheat protein is, but they find a problem with leg hemoglobin. With Beyond Meat Burger, that's a little more satisfying to those types of consumers, except for refined coconut oil, which is a bad fat now. And so in that regard, those nutrition-oriented, health food-oriented individuals don't find that either of these are really acceptable. These are the different product types. Burgers primarily because it's easy to create crumbles. We can make crumbles out of textured vegetable protein that you swear are going to be ground beef. And those of you who have family members that are really price conscious and they go in and buy the soy protein crumbles instead of bacon bits, you understand that perfectly. Nuggets, links, patties, and then grounds, those are all that. They still, again, have not figured out how to make the plant proteins resemble intact meat products for the most part. Here's a nutritional profile, and I apologize for the busyness of this. We obviously know that ground turkey is the gold standard as far as burgers because it's got the lowest amount of calories, least amount of fat. If you look at ground beef, this is a typical profile of 85-15, or your ground chuck type products. Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger, you see that when we look at calories and protein, just about the same as a regular ground beef patty. Some variation in fat, saturated fat a little bit higher in the Impossible Burger. And then when we get down to carbohydrate, fiber, and sodium, guys, carbohydrate and fiber, those are good things. Look at sodium. Not a good thing. We look at black bean burgers, which, again, some of the plant producers say, oh, this is our gold standard. Look at the nutritional profile there. I'll step over so you all can see a little bit better. 385, twice the amount in a ground turkey and a third more than in either the other two products. If you look at carbohydrates, high carbohydrate, high fiber, and again, a fairly high level of sodium. So if you want to buy plant-based, my advice to consumers is read the label, figure out exactly what you're going to get with your products. These are all the different companies making plant-based meat. Analogues, obviously, Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat. Some of you will recognize plant companies, Nestle, Unilever, Kraft. Look down the list, Tyson, Maple Leaf Foods, Smithfield, Hormel. traditional meat companies, they all have a stake in this plant. Why? Because they're profit-oriented companies. If there's a profit in plant-based and they're going to lose some market share, they're going to be willing to make that up in a plant-based sector. 41% of Americans have tried a plant-based meat. Half of those are under age 50. 54% make over $100,000 a year. It's not for poor people. Only 31% making less than $40,000 per year have tried the product. 23% have cut back on their meat consumption. But look at that, 72% are eating the same amount of meat as they were 5 years ago. So, again, there's going to be a continuing demand for meat. Overall, meat consumption in the U.S. is increasing, and that's on a per capita basis. That's a little surprising, but the estimates that I've seen for beef, pork, chicken, and even lamb have stayed the same or increasing for the next couple of years. Switching gears, insect protein, animal, plant, or neither? Well, they're animals. So that has created quite a dilemma because we're moving from insect harvest to intensive production. They are very efficient and effective at producing proteins, whether it's black soldier fly protein or from some of the other sources. 35 to 55% protein, that is an extremely high protein content for a food item. 15 to 35% fat, that fat is mostly unsaturated fatty acids. Again, what we perceive as the healthy type. 5 to 10% fiber, we all know we probably need a little bit more fiber in our diet, and they have all the essential minerals, a little deficient on some of the vitamins. In Western countries, the major insects that we use tend to be crickets, mealworm, and locusts, and you've probably seen some of those on the market now, particularly in the health food stores. We heat, dry, grind into flours and powders, and then add them. The difficulty is in the U.S., because it's an animal protein, you can't add it into a ruminant protein diet. Now, it's debatable as to whether you can add this type of insect protein into non-ruminant species like swine and poultry diets. So far, the major companies are afraid to tackle FDA on that aspect. So that's a political issue as well as a regulatory and technical issue. Where's insects? Where are they consumed? Well, you can see that Central and South America, some countries, Asia, Africa, and surprisingly enough, Australia. Now, who's been to Australia? You know, they've got all kinds of different strange and unique foods, and so I found it a little surprising that they eat that. It doesn't surprise me that 2/3 of the world's population either regularly or have consumed insect products. Number of species here, again, in some countries, it's over 200 to 300 different species of insects. And so if we can't grow forages and get rid of our insect control there, we might be able to harvest some of those armyworms and Bermuda grass pests and make a better use of them. I said it's probably used as insect powder. Farmed crickets, we've got one of the largest producers of farmed crickets just across the river over in Port Allen here in Louisiana. There's a greater acceptability if they're used at 20% or less in spicy or savory foods. Again, that fits Cajun culture pretty well here in Louisiana. The difficulty is that because they're insect proteins, they have to be labeled as allergens because they cross-react with the crustacean allergens, shellfish, and others, and they create some immunoreactivity of their protein epitope regions. with myosin and actin. 3D printing. Most of you have a 3D printer or know what it is. We use different types of inkjets, whether it's green, blue, red, and black, and mix those in to get the color charts that we want. 3D printing is the same process. Sometimes they can solubilize the ingredients and then, quote, print out a food product. Most of you are familiar with the materials industry now, primarily plastics, but some metal, actually having a template and printing out the product. 3D printing of meat is exactly that same principle, but there are about 5 different major types how it's done. One is extrusion or inkjet. Those are fairly similar, that you just pumping out the product, and depending upon the type of input material, then you can put in fat, you can put in protein, you can put in connective tissue, etc. That is, if connective tissue were soluble, which is, again, another problem. 2 of the different aspects are using sintering. Now, until I started looking, I didn't know what sintering was. Sintering is binding together materials either through heat or pressure. And so that's why there's 2 different sintering types. One uses heat, one uses pressure to actually bind those different materials together. And then the last is to actually just use compounds that bind one to another. So if we look at things like carrageenan and those type binders, those are what they would actually be used for 3D meat products. Some of them are strictly plant-based. So we see up here at the top. Some are animal-based with whey proteins, etc. And some are hybrid, where they use mammalian adipose tissues and then they use a plant structure and actually form those. So we're getting fairly sophisticated with some of the 3D printing. This may overcome some of the other technologies with that are limitations in the plant-based and with our cell-based proteins. This probably surprises you, right? You never thought that we could make meat from air. Well, some enterprising, guess what state they're from? Louder. California. David is absolutely correct. Some scientists in California, pseudoscientists if you will, found that there's some hygienotroph, probiotic microorganisms that will transform CO2, oxygen, and nitrogen as long as you got the right mineral and nutrient mix. And they'll come up with to be an 80% protein, but bland both in color and taste powder. That means that you can add other stuff to make a meat product, and it contains the 9 essential amino acids and all the vitamins and minerals. Now, do I think that's probably a commercial possibility in the next couple of years? No, but you can't discount that there's lots of different innovative ways that we can get protein into our bodies from all these different sources. So, in summary, shift in consumer perceptions, that drives research and development and then ultimately commercial products. There's a growing number of consumers, whether it's environmental, whether it's animal welfare, that don't want to eat proteins from animal products. And we could spend a whole nother day talking about all the imitation dairy products that some of you might actually use, almond milk, etc. But we know that cultured meat and those other technologies are advancing very fast. I keep a master slide set of about 50, 60 slides. I update every week because of the information that comes out. So with that, I'll close. Hope I haven't taken too much of Pat's time, and answer any quick questions that you might have. Yes, sir.
Have you eaten any of it?
Oh, absolutely.
Just curious.
You want to know what I think, don't you?
And yes.
Have you ever eaten meat that was really tough and chewy and you say, I never want to go back there again?
I have.
And you've eaten some of the best steaks in your life, whether you prepared them or somebody else did. Same with these products. Same with these products. I've eaten the Whopper burgers twice. Okay? My meat bite manager, I came in one day, said, here, go taste this. Immediately he said, oh, that's a Whopper, an imitation Whopper. And I said, absolutely. The other day, he and I went out, had the best plant-based burger I've ever tasted. It was really hard to tell that quote wasn't beef. So, again, different ways of preparation, different sources. That's a good question, though. That's why I advise, if you haven't, try it, see what you think. Insect proteins, I'm a little shakier on those. But we have some scientists in food science and nutrition that are actually doing insect-based protein work. That's why, after a while, they decided, no, let's not try and make an actual, quote, meat analog type product. Let's go back to the powdered form and use it as a protein adjuvant. David?
I may have misunderstood, but I thought you said early on that there was a researcher, maybe even at LSU, or maybe somewhere, that there might be actually a cattle breed effect on the source of some cells. Did you say that, or did I miss that?
We have a scientist who's looking at a breed of cattle that is heavily marbled, and a breed of cattle, and we probably don't have to look too far down the road to see them, that is very adaptable to southern conditions, but doesn't produce the kind of meat quality. He's looking at those crossbred cattle to see whether we can incorporate both, but at the same time, we know that Brahmins don't marble very well for the most part, even though Don Frankie found that there's that upper 5% that do, but in that regard, he's trying to figure out how can we, I won't say manipulate, but how do we influence muscle and fat development all the way back in the embryo stage that then will develop into the fetal calf that then we'll have as a live animal. So some of that basic research is very much needed so we know and understand how do these cells communicate. Back when I was a biochemistry major, which lasted about 3 weeks, before I finally got smart, yeah, it took me that long to figure out biochemistry was not my forte. Even then, that was just the beginning of cells do communicate. And what one cell produces as a chemical influences another cell, and how they then grow and develop and influence other cells. We're still really in the infancy of understanding all of that when it comes to livestock and how they grow and develop.
Are the Beyond Meat, Impossible Meat, some of these folks funding some of that?
The answer is, unfortunately, the Impossible Meat and Beyond Meat product, they are strictly plant-based.
Oh.
Any animal thing is bad. Now, the plant and animal companies, like Tyson or Mel, that are into both, they're kind of like me. They see that as long as you can develop a product that is what a consumer wants, that's their purpose. And so in that regard, they're kind of ambivalent as to, is meat going to be replaced or not? And even the R&D people that I know pretty well, I've been surprised at how many of the meat companies had jumped into some of these plant-based products, but obviously they want to sell products. Anybody else?
Ken, totally different than that, but you mentioned almond milk. I thought we had resolved that can't be called milk or something as a sale, but still see all that.
Well, I'll use a bad example. But just about the time that the human physiologists thought that we could use stem cells from your own body to cure some of the ailments that we have, they found out that no, they don't really know enough about that to really make it work every time. So coming back, Wink, to your question, yeah, we don't know a lot about things that we thought we knew a lot about. Does that make sense?
My question is, you referred, and this doesn't have anything to do with the meat product, it's about labeling, but you referred to almond milk. And I was thinking on the label of things that those type things can be labeled milk.
Well, that's the controversy now, is the dairy industry finally woke up. Pardon my poor language about the dairy industry, but they finally woke up and realized that yes, almond milk and all the others are starting to take a huge market share away from them. If they, 30 years ago, had said, no, we want FDA to, quote, abide by the regulation and the labeling laws that are in effect, then we would have these labeled as almond imitation milk products and be very clear to consumers. So FDA now, we'll see what the new administration does. They were just starting to look at that. But we all know when you have a different administration, they look at things in a different view. We'll see how that affects the labeling of these meat products. So right now, I think FDA and USDA, because there's no commercial products that are really available, they're delaying until they see how the dairy industry and what that shakes out. Some of the large dairy cooperatives have actually filed suit with FDA that they're not following the law. So does that answer your question? So I think it's strictly a delay. Let's see what happens with another food product before we actually stick our foot into another puddle. Thank you.